Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Scale degree chords versus modal chords. Focusing in on the Ionian mode, otherwise known as the major scale. So get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin' with Microsoft Excel. Or in Excel, if you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we'll basically build this from a blank worksheet. But if you do have access, 4 tabs down below, fretboard example, practice blank. Fretboard tab having a simulated fretboard, we will refer to the example tab having in essence the answer key. The practice tab's got pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay because we'll be working in the blank tab, having a beautiful blank worksheet so we can practice our Excel and music skills at the same time. Let's go to the fretboard tab to get an idea of the optimal way we want to be visualizing the fretboard so that when we then look at our chords, we don't let it pull us out of the optimal way to be visualizing the fretboard, which is as analogous to a planet, a map of the territory, having 7 destination or continent type locations, 5 non-destination or ocean type locations that we want to go through to get to the destination or continent locations. Our head is above the fretboard in space, if you will, above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. Imagining the fretboard like the planet rotating around, having 12 degrees of rotation that we assign, typically working in the 4th degree of rotation, the degrees being analogous to the 12 notes in the musical alphabet, the 4th degree of rotation being the collection of notes around the C major. Once we get that collection of notes, we notice that if we were to choose any other collection of notes, 7 notes, 12 collections of 7 notes, then it would just shift up. C sharp would be here, D sharp, the whole thing would just be rotating to the right. So when we think of things that have to do with intervals that are fixed in nature, such as with chords, we can imagine that we can easily copy and paste those chord shapes up, which is the essence of, say, a caged type system, for example. So what we want to do is not let the naming convention pull us out of that optimal way to be visualizing the fretboard. And the problem with that is that we have a naming convention that's usually going to be focused in on the note names, which are not as optimal. We'd rather be focusing in on what I would say is equivalent to the continent names, which could be the Nashville number system, if you're familiar with that, 1 through 7, basically an absolute numbering system that's naming the nodes or modes. The 1 is the Ionian, the 4 is the Lydian, the 3 is the Phrygian, the 2 is the Dorian, and so on and so forth. So when we think about our chords then, most of the time, of course, we're going to name the chords based on the note that we're on, which is fine, but it would almost be better if we named it in a generic way by the node that we're on. It's an Ionian chord, not a C chord, right? You could move and if you do that, then you can move the Ionian chord up to an Ionian D chord, an Ionian, right? You can shift everything up. That's what makes it movable, similar to the caged system, which is what attracts many people to the guitar because we're trying to visualize the guitar by shape. That's the optimal way to visualize it, but then we have a naming convention that isn't as optimal. And it's not just the guitar. The same thing would be applied to even like the piano, although it's not completely symmetrical. It's not an the chords, as we will see, is not an optimal naming convention at all, right? It's like ridiculously not optimal. So, and what would be optimal to try to name things by basically the relative position, by the node shapes. If you do that, you can create the whole song by relative positions, and then you can easily transpose the song through any of the 12 keys very easily. That's how it should be, right? That should be it should be really easy to say, this song's in the key of C, and now I'm going to transpose it. I don't need to have a whole list of different notes. I just need to transpose it to the other collection of 7 notes, and then all the relative positions will remain the same, right? That's just obviously the optimal way to be thinking about it, but the naming conventions don't allow us to do that, in part why? Because it goes back to the naming convention based on the scale degrees. instead of the naming convention on modal distance. So once again, the chords are forcing us to rename the nodes that we're on two ways. One way is that it's forcing us to think of if I go to the Mixolydian and build a chord around it, to name it a major chord if it's only a triad, which is weird because I'm building it off of the Mixolydian. So you would think it would be like a Mixolydian type of chord. So that's going to cause us some confusion. It just naturally has to. And it's going to be built off of the as though this is the 1. So it's going to force us to rename it from the 5 to the 1 because it's going to be built from a scale degree construction. So how can we optimize the way we're going to visualize the fretboard while we still have these tools, which is like talking to a woke lawyer that keeps using terminology that makes no sense? There's some sense in there. He's trying to communicate something to us, but he keeps on saying like equity instead of equality and social justice instead of justice and this, and you got to like parse out all the nonsense and say, let's get down to the actual meaning of the words and try to see if we can optimize the way to use them to do something that's actually productive instead of just babble, right? So that's what we got to do here. So if we go to the example tab, what we'll do is we'll rebuild this bit to practice building our notes and then the Ionian nodes. We'll rebuild the intervals, and then we'll focus first starting on the Ionian mode, the Ionian chords, the chords built off the Ionian. I'll show you the most optimal way, I believe, from my research, if we were to build these from scratch, as we saw in a prior section, and then I'll show you the way that is currently used to name them, and then we'll map out the distances. And the new thing that we will add here that we didn't do in the last section when we looked at the chords is now map out the chords by intervals, right? So we can look at the chords now with intervals, now that we've looked at intervals, and we can actually derive the chords. And then I'll actually make a bucket. This is the normal way that if you learn chords that you'll learn them. There's going to be multiple buckets. You've got the major bucket, the minor bucket, the dominant 7 bucket, the diminished bucket, the half diminished bucket, and then you've got the extensions. The majors, as we will see, will fit neatly under the majors. But when you get down to other areas like the minors, like a Phrygian, it doesn't neatly fit into the minors because you have to use these extensions. And then you'll see that when we get to the Lydian, it doesn't neatly fit into the majors. You need these extensions. And then when we get to the Mixolydian, they made a whole nother category for Mixolydian. Those are the dominant 7 chords. And then the Aeolian doesn't even fit all into the minor, as you would expect, because you need this extension. And then the Locrian, they had to make this whole other thing for half diminished. Now, you can see just off the bat, those buckets, there's no way that that's optimal, because these buckets are just for a collection of 7 notes, which are all in the same collection of notes. So it seems like, how in the world do we have a system where I have to use extensions over here, which you would think you would only have to use if you used a note that's outside of the 7-note collection. Meaning, I would expect that if you added a note that's in the ocean, right? It's not in the collection of 7 notes. That would make sense. But if you're making chords that are all built off of the 7-note collection, you would think your system would neatly fit those. You wouldn't have any weird looking chords if you had an optimal naming convention. It's just obvious that we don't have an optimal naming convention. What would be the optimal naming convention? You name the thing by the mode that you're in, right? Which they were forced to do anyways that's what they ended up doing for the Mixolydian. They might as well call dominant 7 chords the Mixolydian modal chord, right? And they might as well have called the Locrian half diminished the Locrian chords. That's what right? That would be they basically had to do that anyways. Now again, there's nuances in there. You can make some arguments that you're gonna, that's the general idea. I'll show you what I mean. Let's go to the blank tab and let's build this thing out. All right, we're gonna start with numbers. We'll just build out our notes again. I have to select the whole thing. Don't get ahead of yourself. Right click. I gotta format the cells. I'm gonna make them currency, negative numbers bracketed and red, and no dollar signs. Remove the decimals. Boom, boom. Okay, and then I'm gonna go home tab font group and make it bold. All right, so we have the numbers. I'm going to go 1 through 12 to start off with. 1, 2, copying those two. I'm going to do this fairly quickly because we've done this before. Going down to 12. It's just good practice to practice our notes. And then the letters, the note letters, let's just say L-E-T, are going to be A. A, B stands for A sharp or B flat in our system. B, C, C, D stands for C sharp or D flat. D, D, E, D sharp or E flat. E, and then F G stands for F sharp or G flat. G, and then G, A stands for G sharp or A flat. Okay, and then if I combine those together, then I'm going to say combine or something like that. And this is going to be equal to, let's do the 1 and A. The 1 and A, and then I'll copy that down. So this is the two of them combined together. Ba-boom. Okay, and then I'm going to make this, let's make this top bit black and white. Let's make this black and white. I don't know why I put it on the second row. We'll deal with that later. Let's select these and double click, making them skinny. And then let's make this blue to color it. So I'm going to go Home tab, Font Group, making it blue. If you don't have that blue, it's in the More Colors. You don't have to use that blue, but I like it right there. Boom, blue. And then we'll border it. All right, then I'm going to copy it again. I'm going to say this equals the 1, and I'm just going to copy this over and rotate it another, as though we're going around in a circle, or as though we're going like up an octave, however you want to see it. Those are the kind of ways that we visualize it. So we'll bring it on down to 12, and I'm going to make these a different color. I'll make it bordered, and I don't know, let's make these green. Okay. So then on the modes, I'm gonna do our wholes and half steps from the Ionian using our formula to select our 7 notes. So it's going to be whole step from C to D, whole step from D to E, half step from E to F, whole step from F to G, whole step from G to A, and then whole step from A to B, and then half step goes back home to C, which starts over. So I'm going to make this one yellow. So, and then I'll repeat it again. So we could go around the circle again, or up an octave on the number, the note number line, if you visualize it that way. And then above it, I'll select this one here, but we're focusing in on this middle bit right there. So if we start that as the 1, this is going to be the Ionian. So we're naming the continents, Ionian, and then an ocean, and then a Dorian, and then an ocean, the Dorian Ocean, and then we have Phrygian, and then no ocean to get to Lydian, and then we got the Lydian Ocean, and then we've got Mixolydian. Let's see if I could spell it right. I need my cheat sheet so I could spell it right. Mixolydian, and then the Mixolydian Ocean, and then the Locrian, and then back, and then, now wait a sec, I missed the Aeolian. Aeolian, and then the Aeolian Ocean, and then the Locrian. And there's no crazy Locrian Ocean because it goes back then to the Ionian. So now let's put the letters. So I'm going to call this an I, and then this is going to be a D for the Dorian, P for the Phrygian, Y for the Lydian instead of L because the L looks like a 1, X for the Mixolydian so it doesn't look like a major or minor, A for the Aeolian, N for the Locrian because it's crazy so it's backwards and we spell it from the N backwards because it's crazy. It's all backwards. All right, I'm going to make that a skinny, and let's make this bordered and black for our borderings. I could center it, and let's put some borders around this. That was a header, not a border. Let's put some borders around that. Okay, and now I'm going to make a skinny over here. Let's make a skinny so it's separating my other table. And I'm just going to put my collection of 7 notes is just going to be the C, the D, the E, the F, the G, my collection of 7, the A, and then the B. I can number them with an absolute numbering system of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now that's the same numbering system as the major scale, but I'm not going to change it as I change the root, as in like the Nashville number system. That's a permanent nodal numbering system. I'm going to give it an abbreviation for the modes again. This time I'm just going to choose the first 3 letters: ion, door, fri, li, lid, mix, ao. If you're not good at Latin, then maybe you can just remember the 3 letters, right? That might be a little bit easier. The ion, the door, the fri, the lid, the mix, the ao, the lac. Or this should be loc, and the loc. Okay? That's easier if you don't like to learn Greek. Well, like and that's once again going to be the I, the D, the P, the Y, the X, the A, and then the N. All right. So now I'm gonna make this orange, because that's going to represent the notes that we're focused on. Orange, bordered. Double click here, making it small, and then I'm going to repeat it again. So we're going to once again go around the circle, or in a note number line, but this time by the 7-note collection of notes, which you can imagine repeats or goes up an octave. We'll copy that down, and so that goes down to the loc. Let's make these yellow. All right. Now, when I build a chord, notice what you do with the chord is you just skip every other one. So if I skip every other one, I can learn that from like the numbers. I could say if it was on the Ionian, it's going to be the 1, it's going to be the 3, it's going to be the 5. I'm just skipping every other one, the 7, then it goes back to the 2, which is the one we skipped, and then it goes to the 4, and then it goes to the 6. So you see what's happening with the chords. We just skip every other one. We still have all of the same. I'm going to make this bordered, and let's make these green. We still have all of the relative positions. It's just that we're going to skip every other one when we build the chord. So you might, if you memorize an acronym that skips every other one, it might be useful to memorize the chord. So let me show you what I mean. If it was like you would go from the Ionian to the Phrygian to the Mixolydian to the Locrian to the Dorian to the Lydian to the Aeolian, right? That's going to be the distances that we go. Let's make that green, bordered. I'm going to double click up top, making it skinny. So you can think of that as like an acronym for that, right? It could be, I'm going to call it IP, like intellectual property, X and D, like X and D, but X and D, IP, X and D, yeah. Now I don't know what X and D is, right? But it rhymes with IP, and it's X and D, and then yeah. So if you memorize that acronym, that's how you're going to build all the chords, because you skip every other one. So meaning, if I'm going to build an Ionian chord, then instead of going the Ionian to the Dorian, I go Ionian to the Phrygian. Instead of going to the Lydian, I go to the Mixolydian. I go to the Locrian, and then I go to the Dorian, Lydian, Mixolydian, right? And if you start from the Mixolydian, then you're starting at the IP X, the X and D part, right? So you'd start with an X, and then instead of going to the Aeolian, you'd go to the N, Locrian. Instead of going to the Ionian, you'd go to the Dorian. So it might be useful to memorize some acronym. You could just look at it by the numbers. If I start on the 3, then I'm going to skip every other number. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it goes around the horn. Instead of going to 8, it goes to 2, 4, 6. Let's repeat this whole thing again. I'm going to say this equals this one again. I'm going to copy it down 2 more times so I can repeat this whole thing again as well. So I'm going to copy this down to there, and let's make this bordered, and then I'm going to copy it down 1 more time. Let's copy it down to here. I went too far, so there it is. I'm going to get rid of the borders on this one. No borders. And then we'll say this goes down to this B, and I'm going to make this one orange this time. Orange. And then this is going to be yellow again. So we've repeated it 2 more times, and this will be yellow. And then I'm just going to delete the zeros and the number signs here. And here. Now these aren't exactly right. This is not right. I'm going to say this equals this one. Copy that across. And then I'm going to copy this down. Boom. And now I'm going to delete the zeros and the number signs. Might not be the most efficient way to do it, but, and then I'm going to make this whole bit a different color. Let's make it blue. Right. So now if I was to make a chord from like the Locrian, then I would say it would be the N to the Locrian to the Dorian to the Lydian to the Aeolian to the Ionian to the Phrygian to the Mixolydian, and then it goes back to the Locrian. So see what I mean? You just skip every other note. So if you want to build a chord, you can memorize the acronym of this acronym, and that will tell you to skip every other note. Or you could just number it and just skip every other note from the nodes that you are on, and that's how you build normal chords. Let's go ahead and once again make a skinny. Let's make another skinny on this one. I'm going to copy this skinny, Home tab, Format Paint, put that down here. And then I'm going to say that this is going to be, I'm going to start over here actually. Oh, wait, let's do this. I'm going to say half steps and intervals. So let's repeat our intervals because we're going to add the intervals as a way that we can build our chords as well, to think of them as interval distances. So I'm going to make this black and white, and so remember our intervals are where you get that weird terminology, so we have to just list out the intervals again. So I'm going to say if we go from 0, if we go 0 up, it's going to go 0 going clockwise around the wheel. We can go up 11. If I start on 0 from any point, it can go up to 11. So if I'm on C, the 4, I can go up 1, up 2, up 3, up 4, up 5, up 6, up 7, up 8, up 9, up 10, up 11, and then it repeats again. So then I'm going to say, okay, let's name those. We usually call those a 0 note away perfect first, and then we call it a 1 note away minor second. I'm just going to list these out. A 2 note away minor second, and this would be a 3 note away minor third. Sorry, this was a 2 note away major second, a 3 note away minor third, a 4 note away major third, a 5 note away perfect fourth, and then a 6 note away diminished fifth, which is the weird one. Could be an augmented fourth or whatever, but I'm not going to get into that. 7 note away perfect fifth, and then we have an 8 note away minor 6, a 9 note away 9 note away major 6, and then a 10 note away minor 7, and then a 10 note away major 7. Now that's going clockwise. We could go beyond an octave, but we talked about that before. We're just going to imagine that we're just going within 1 octave, or that it's going to repeat. I could go in the negative direction though, so I do want to add the negative direction just so we have an idea of that, which we might think about within our chords as well. So let's select this whole thing, and I'm going to say insert, right click, insert, and shift them down. And then I'm going to just format paint this one up top because it made it all the format above it. And then I'm going to say this is going to be -1. And so I'm going to say, let's say it's going to be equal to this one -1. And then I can copy that up. So that's going to be up to -11. I'm going to delete this top one that went too far. Delete, and then shift these up. And then this is going to be, what I want to make it, this is going to be a negative By the way, I messed this one up. This should be an 11 note away. So this should be, this one, if I go one step back, because 12 minus 1 would be 11. So I want to make it a -1 major 7. So how can I do that? I could say this is going to be, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to say this is going to be a -1. That's going to go in front. And then I'm going to say this equals the last two letters, which I could say is going to be from the right of this cell, comma, 2. Right? That gives me the major 7. So let me put this one over here. I can just say, give me that. And then I'm going to go into here and say, and then put this in front of it, and then and ties it together. So there it is. So -1 major 7. So then I can copy that up, and that gives us our intervals going in the negative direction. I'm not going to get into why I name it that way. Again, the negative gets wonky. We won't talk about that possibly until a future presentation, but I want to have all of the options laid out. So I'm going to make this then border blue, boom. Okay, so now let's build out our chords. So I'm going to start with over here, I'm going to make this the Ionian. So I'm going to say this equals, let's just say this is going to be equal to the Ionian. And then I want to get that letter there as well. I want everything to copy over. So I'm going to use some formulas that might seem like too much right now, but it'll make more sense once I try to copy this. So I'm going to say this equals, I'm going to say X lookup. Whoops, that's not an X lookup, X lookup. And I want to find that Ionian in, this range of text, comma, oh, wait a sec, hold on a sec. I want to find this Ionian and then comma. Where do you want to find it? I want to find it in this range. And then comma. Then what do you want us to return? I want you to give me the letter. So find that Ionian here and then give me the I. Okay, so there it is. So I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to make this absolute for the ranges, F4, 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 so that when I copy that down, it will give me that. If you don't have to worry about that too much until we start to think about how to copy it down. I'm going to make this a 4 because we're going to be working in the key of C. I'm going to make this red because that's going to be the thing that I will be able to change in the future to change all of my chord names. So then I'd like to find that C over here. So once again, I'm going to say equals X lookup, find that 4, comma, in my number of my note numbers, so down from here down to here, comma, and return to me then the note letter from here to here. Boom. There it is. Now, why do I have this extra column? I'm going to delete this column because I built on column B for some reason. Let me just delete that. Get out of here. What are you doing? Okay, so if I go into this, then I can put absolute references on these two arrays. So I'm going to say F4 here, F4, 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 $sign before the letters and the numbers. All right, so then this is going to be the number of notes. And then I'm going to say, okay, so I'm going to make one more column here. Let's go here. I'm going to right click and insert another column. I'm going to make this a skinny by taking this skinny, home tab, format paint, skinny P, and then over here I'm going to repeat the 4. This equals this 4. Why? Because that's going to help me with my formula once again when I copy it down. So this will make more sense when I copy it down, but I'll show you what happens when I build the formulas out. So we're going to build this out to here, and I think that'll work. Okay, so the number of notes. So when we build a chord, we usually think of 3 as the baseline number of notes. And then so I can have a 3-note chord or 3 plus 1, a 4-note chord. Now and you could think, well, is 2 notes a chord? 1 note's a note, 2 should be a chord. Most people say it's like 3 that makes a chord, right? A triad. So we'll stick with that idea. So then I'm going to copy this down. So we can have a 3-note chord, a 4-note chord, a 5-note chord, a 6-note chord, or 7-note chord. Those are all the notes in our collection of 7 notes. So typically that's our standard high point for the collection of notes. Now again, when you think about chords, usually if I'm going to make a 4-note chord, I assume that I have the 3 notes and then I'm just going to add the next one because you want to have the triad. Might not be the case. I could add the 4th note, and then drop one of these 3, right? Or when I have a 5-note chord, it assumes that I had the 4 notes prior to it, and then I'm adding the last one. Might not actually be the case. I could be dropping one, and we'll get into how we might be able to be more specific in our naming convention to show that. But the general idea, the easiest naming convention is to just say, I'm just going to list the number of notes that are in the chord, and then you just skip every other note in the collection of 7 notes. That would be the easiest thing to do, right? So in other words, if I'm on, you would think, if I'm in the C, you could just say, hey, look, I'm making a Ionian 3-note chord or an Ionian 2-modal half-step chord, right? I don't even have to say it's the C because I already know I'm in the key of the C, right? So, but it's the Ionian node that's important. But I'll name the C because we'd like to have that in play. So we could say it's going to be, let's try to do this with a formula. So I'm going to say this is going to be the Ionian up top, and then I'm going to say and then I want to pull in this C right here, Ionian C, and then I'm going to say and Ionian C, and we want a 2-note chord, which is going to be this. Now I'm going to say this -1. This stands for an Ionian node or mode C note 2 modal whole step chord. So it's a 3-note chord, this 2 not representing the number of notes, but rather being a distance term saying, hey, we're starting on the Ionian node, which is a C note, and then we're going a full distance to get to the last note of the 3-note collection, which is 2 modal whole steps up. So the number of notes will always be 1 less because once again, we're starting at 0 instead of counting the scale degree that we are on. So the Ionian, what is that? That's going to be the Ionian node or mode within our collection of 7 notes. The C would be redundant if we already know the collection of notes. If we're saying, hey, look, we're playing in the key of C, the collection of notes around the C major, you could just call it an Ionian 2 modal whole step chord. Why would that be better? Because then you can easily transpose everything to any of the 12 collections of notes. See, it would be optimal to write your song and say, look, I'm going to write it without referring to any notes, and then I can just tell you which collection of notes that it is in, making it really easy to transpose to any of the different colors or flavors. There's 12 different parallel colors or flavors that you can simply shift up to. That should be really easy to do if we were having an optimized kind of system for our naming conventions. So again, the C is a convention. That's the note that we are on. But again, it would be redundant if we already know the collection of notes. And the 2 represents 2 modal whole steps. That's a distance type of term. What's a modal whole step? Well, if we're on the Ionian, remember, we're just skipping every other note. So I'm not going to go to the Dorian. A whole step is going to go to the Phrygian, meaning it's 2 notes up within our collection of 7 notes. It's going to be skipping every other note. So we've got the Ionian to the Phrygian to the Mixolydian, 2 modal whole steps up, not including the one that we are on, which is the Ionian. In other words, we're going to go from the I to the P to the X. Not from the modal half step would be going from I to D. We're going to go from I to P, not P to Y, but P to X. Okay, so that's going to be the idea. Now, what I'd like to do is to be able to copy this down. Notice that if I pull this Ionian from up top here and the Dorian, when I copy it down, then it's going to have a problem because I need to make some absolute references here. So let's see, if I have the Ionian up top, that's going to be in S2. Let's make this F4. So when I copy it down, that will move down, and the C is in S3. So wait a sec, the Ionian is in S1. Let's make that F4. So these first two have $ before the letter and number. Then when I copy it down, we have it nice and easy, right? So if that's an Ionian C2, this is an Ionian C3, which means I'm just going to copy every other note. If you look at it over here, that would be the Ionian node to the Phrygian to the Mixolydian, and then we're adding the Locrian, which from a scale degree would be the 7th, right? So so that would be the idea of it. Now, the normal naming convention would be something like this. We'd have to say it's a C major, and let's copy that down. Let's try to do this way. Let's say this is going to be this C, and then and a major. C and major. Wait a sec, can't do that. C, it's going to be that C and then I have to put brackets around it because I'm typing major. And then I'm going to go into here and make this F4 on the keyboard. So then I can copy this down. So now this would be C major is a 3-note chord, and this would be a C major, and then I'm going to say and 7. And this would be a C major and 9. And this would be a C major, and I'm going to say and 11, and this would be a C major and 13. So what does that mean? So the C major is a 3-note chord, so it's still just skipping every other note. So it basically means Ionian to Phrygian to Mixolydian, or in this case, a C to the E to the G, right? Because we're skipping every other half step in our collection of 7 notes, skipping every other note in a collection of 7 notes. All right, we'll get into the distance in terms of intervals in a second. So notice what happens if it's a C major 7. We're assuming it has the baseline of those first 3, and then we're adding the 7. So what is the 7? The 7 is the 7 from a scale degree standpoint. So see how that's causing us a problem, because when we name this, we name it with a scale degree 1, 3, 5, and 7. And this last 7 is doing the same thing as this convention is, but instead of just saying, hey, look, it's a 4-note chord. It's got 3 modal whole steps up from the Ionian node. It's labeling it by the last scale degree that is within it. So it's still just labeling it by the last node, in essence, within a scale degree type of system, instead of just saying, just count every other note within our collection of notes. One of the problems with that is that when you go to the 9 here, it doesn't want to go up from the 7 back to the 2. The 9 should be equivalent to the 2. Why not? Because if it was a 2, it would be a number that's smaller than 7. And I think the thought process was that then we wouldn't know that you should be taking the 1, 3, 5, 7 before going back to the 2. Right? If I just said it was a C major 2, you might think that it's only a 2-note chord or something like that, right? It might be. So that means they wanted to make it a 9. They call that a compound, interval to make the 9. So the 9 is equivalent to the 2, and then the 11 is equivalent to the 4 that we skipped in essence, and the 13 is equivalent to the 6 that we are skipping. Now again, we already know the convention, so we didn't really have to make a 9, 11, and a 13. If you just know that if I say it's a C major 2, that I have to first go through the 1, 3, 5, 7, and then back to the 2. That should just be the convention, and then you wouldn't have had to add these 3. But it will even be easier just to say, look, you're just going to start on the note you're on and skip every other note in the collection of 7 nodes, which will be easy to do if you just say that you're on the node within that collection and just take every other one from that point, which you can actually just make an acronym of and list it out. So see how much more optimal this would be than this. Now this one is as optimal as it gets because we're in the major scale. So this is as good as it gets, right? Because everything was built off of the major scale. It gets messier from the major scale typically, and we need more extensions and whatnot. Whereas this will be just as clean all the way through all collections of notes. As long as we don't land in the ocean, this convention will be very clean, and we should be able to remove the note names entirely if you just tell people what collection of notes you're in allowing you to easily shift the whole thing up so that you can play the same song in all 12 collections of 7 notes without having to rename the whole thing, right? That's how it should be. Okay. All right, so I think I've gone on too long here. So this is, we'll continue on from here. Next time we'll add the modal points so that we can name this by modal points. We'll look at the note distance. We'll look at the interval distance. We'll look at the modal distances, and then we'll see how these fit into our normal buckets under the normal naming conventions. And then after we build this out for the Ionian, we'll look at we'll build our chords off of every other point, comparing and contrasting the traditional system and then what I think would be a clearly more logical, at least from a functional standpoint, type of system. By the way, the only argument really for the current system over what I would propose here is by saying, well, then, you know, this convention only has one name for every collection of notes, and so on and so forth. But even that, like, anyway, I don't want to get into that now. We'll talk about that later. But that's going to be the idea, and we'll continue on with this next time.